What's going on, folks? Um, Been waiting for a stream. I apologize. I was a little slow in getting this set up, but we are going to cover the ICA report, specifically the HPSCI report on the ICA. Took a quick glance at it, and we'll just kind of read it together. And I might be streaming for a while, so get comfortable if you're not comfortable. And certainly, if anything else comes out today, plan on covering that. Um, Hopefully my audio is okay. I had kind of a premium setup, and then I've been playing with it for a while, and I couldn't get to work. So apologies for that. That was kind of the reason for the delay. And we're just going to kind of dig into this and take our time with it. And I will say, there's a couple caveats that are important here. This is a pretty old report. Um, you know, it's dated 2020 here. We're just going to kind of look at it and we'll see what we can figure out. So, oversight, investigation, referral raises a question for me because I think HPSCI actually did their report in 2018. So this seems to be perhaps a little bit different. We'll have to figure out that nuance a little bit. And let me get rid of this banner. All right, and see if I can blow that up a little bit. Oops. Nope, that's not what I want to do. All right. So they offer some conclusions here, and we're, probably not a good idea to prejudge it. We'll just take it as we get it, and we'll work through it. So, conclusions of the ICA raise concerns about Russian attempts to undermine confidence in the U.S. election system, prompting a comprehensive analysis, the examination of the ICA's analysis. Makes sense. I think this one is the more important part. So most ICA judgments on Russia's activities in the U.S. election employed proper analytic tradecraft and were consistent with observed Russian behavior. The key judgments found to be credible include, number one, President Putin ordered conventional and cyber influence operations, notably by leaking politically sensitive emails obtained from computer intrusions. Putin's principal motivations in these operations were to undermine faith in the U.S. democratic process and to weaken what the Russians consider to be an inevitable Clinton presidency. And number three, Putin held back leaking some compromising material for post-election use against the expected Clinton administration. So that's pretty interesting. In contrast to the rest of the ICA, the judgment that Putin developed a clear preference for candidate Trump and aspired to help his chances of victory did not adhere to the tenets of the ICD analytic standards. So right off the bat, they're basically saying the assessments for the ICA are all solid, with the notable exception of Putin's intentions to help Trump. So I glanced through this a little bit, and what they're going to get into is criticism of that one single conclusion. But what they're saying is that the rest of the report is solid. So read a few more bullet points here. Director of the CIA ordered the post-election publication of 15 reports containing previously collected but unpublished intelligence, 3 of which were substandard, containing information that was unclear, of uncertain origin, potentially biased, or implausible. And those became foundational sources for the ICA judgments that Putin preferred Trump over Clinton. The ICA misrepresented these reports as reliable, without mentioning their significant underlying flaws. One scant, unclear, and unverifiable fragment of a sentence from one of the substandard reports constitutes the only classified information cited to suggest Putin aspired to help Trump win. So they're digging in a little bit more on that one conclusion that they're going to criticize, that Putin had a preference for Donald Trump. And they're saying there's only one unverifiable fragment of a sentence, that constitutes the only classified information used to support that assertion. So that is pretty remarkable, because that was one of the more noteworthy parts of the ICA, was that Putin had a preference for Donald Trump. And we saw a lot of news coverage of that throughout 2017, certainly. And all of that relies on a sentence fragment, with substandard analytic standards. So that's not a good start for the ICA report. But again, I mean, we might be, some of the people that have been marketing some of these reports might have oversold this a little bit, because if that is the only judgment that they're going to criticize, on the whole, they're saying that Russia hacked the DNC and interfered with the 2016 election. So we'll continue going through this. The ICA ignored or selectively quoted reliable intelligence reports that challenged and in some cases undermined judgments that Putin sought to elect Trump. Okay, that's important right there. So they're selectively picking out intelligence, and discarding other intelligence, to basically support a specific conclusion that they wanted to reach, is what that seems to be indicating there. The ICA failed to consider plausible alternative explanations of Putin's intentions indicated by reliable intelligence and observed Russian actions. Okay, hopefully they give us a little more color on that. They picked 5 CIA analysts to write the ICA and rushed its production in order to publish 2 weeks before President-elect Trump was sworn in. That's certainly true. Hurried coordination and limited access to the draft reduced opportunities for the ICA to discover misquoting of sources and other tradecraft errors. Well, I mean, if they're selectively editing, or selectively, making subjective calls on what is legitimate and what is not, I'm not sure that rushing it helped at all. Detailed findings. All right. This is the unredacted, fully sourced, limited access investigation report that was drafted and stored in a limited access vault at CIA headquarters. Although the principal findings of this report are identical to the top secret downgraded version prepared for members of Congress, this version contains significantly more detailed quotes. All right, let's see if there's anything worth highlighting here. So finding number 1, the bulk of ICA judgments on Russia's election operations were sound and employed proper analytic tradecraft. So this is what I was kind of opening up with. They're saying the ICA is solid, and that is important to note. The majority found most ICA judgments on Russia's election activities to be well-reasoned, consistent with observed Russian actions, properly documented, and particularly on the cyber intrusion sections, employed appropriate caveats on sources and identified assumptions. Key ICA judgments that the majority found credible are summarized below. Russian efforts to influence the 2016 presidential election represent the most recent expression of Moscow's longstanding desire to undermine the U.S. liberal democratic order. Weird way to phrase that. Russian intelligence services, acting on the orders of Russian President Vladimir Putin, launched conventional and cyber influence operations, notably by leaking politically sensitive emails obtained from computer intrusions during the 2016 election. Putin's principal motivations in these influence operations were to advance Moscow's longstanding desire to undermine faith in U.S. democracy and to weaken from the start what the Russians considered to be an inevitable Clinton presidency. And Putin held back compromising material to use against an expected Clinton administration. All right, fair enough. Yeah, this is a good one. Operations officers at CIA and NSA who produced the raw intelligence cited in the ICA showed great professionalism. This is a bit of a clown show, in my opinion, so far, but all right, fair enough. Finding number 2, significant tradecraft failings cast doubt on ICA judgments of Putin's intentions. All right. So now they're going to dig into that problem again. So as to Putin's intentions, these failures were serious enough to call into question judgments that allege Putin developed a clear preference for candidate Trump and aspired to help his chances of victory, and that Russian leaders never entirely abandoned hope for a defeat of Secretary Clinton. The ICA defined these as high confidence judgments based on a body of reporting from multiple sources. And they gave us a new box. So what the ICA says, Putin's intentions, we further assess Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for Trump. We have high confidence in these judgments. And they repeat that a couple times. ICA judgments on Putin's intentions failed to adhere to the following analytic standards within ICD 203. Properly describe quality and credibility of underlying sources, properly express and explain uncertainties associated with major analytic judgments. And they just give us more criteria. I'm not going to read all that. Based on ICA's significant tradecraft failures, the assessment demonstrated awareness of the tradecraft failures. Assessment demonstrated awareness of the ICD standards in a section describing the analytic process. Basically, they're saying they knew they were messing up, and they should have called that out. Just going to read this, see if there's anything else important. Production of the ICA was subject to unusual directives from the president and senior political appointees, particularly DCIA. The draft was not properly coordinated within CIA or the intelligence community, ensuring it would be published without significant challenges to its conclusions. All right, so that is pointed criticism at the rushed nature of this, and interesting that they call out unusual directives from President Obama. I hope they give us a little bit more detail on that. Tradecraft failures identified in their dispute are limited to sections of the ICA addressing Putin's intentions only. Because the ICA did not follow standard procedures for drafting or coordinating within CIA or the intelligence community, they should not be seen as an indication of systemic problems with analysis from CIA, NSA, or FBI. So this is a bit of a whitewash. This is pretty interesting. They're going out of their way to criticize one specific, very limited finding of the ICA, and they're making it really clear that the rest of the ICA is super solid and trustworthy. Finding number 3, the ICA failed to acknowledge that key judgments on Putin's intentions were based on raw intelligence that did not meet tradecraft standards. So I'm going to skim this here. Let me see if there's anything important. Boy, I can't even read this next section. There's blue text on the right, but I cannot read that. In response to direction from the president to make all information available, CIA officers said the DCIA ordered the publication in early December 2016 of 15 new or revised CIA human reports containing information on Russian intelligence collected prior to the election, and that the CIA professionals had decided not to publish previously for various reasons having to do with tradecraft standards. Most of the 15 were unremarkable, but 3 contained flawed information, and these 3 became foundational sources the ICA cited to claim Putin aspired to help Trump win. So that's important. So 15 were unremarkable, 3 contained flawed information, and they used the 3 that had flawed information. So that's a black eye for the intelligence community. Senior CIA officers said some of the information in these reports had been judged to have not met various longstanding intelligence community standards for publication. That is why they had not been published when first acquired. 2 sensitive reports were not published on DCIA's orders. Interesting. The 3 reports were published after the election on DCIA's orders, despite veteran CIA officer judgments that they contained substandard information that was unclear or of uncertain origin, potentially biased, implausible, or in the words of senior operations officers, odd. Interesting. CIA officers also said that DCIA personally directed that two of the most important reports not be formally disseminated when he first learned of them, ostensibly because they were too sensitive to create printed copies. We were unable to obtain a convincing explanation, however, for why DCIA did this, since the CIA has a special reporting channel whereby sensitive reports are restricted to only the president or as small a group as desired. Interesting. All right, looks like more of the same there. Let's go to the next page. The three reports became foundational sources for the ICA judgments on Putin preferring Trump. So it sounds like on this one point that they're giving us criticism. They really went out of their way to try to include this assessment that Putin preferred Donald Trump, and that we know why, because it became such an important data point for the narrative that we saw throughout 2017. I mean, if you get to the point where it's not clear that Russia is helping Trump, then you don't have the collusion narrative, right? I mean, if there's really no preference between Clinton or Trump, you can't say that Donald Trump is colluding. So that becomes pretty important, and not a good look for John Brennan to have done this, because it sounds like veteran CIA people were telling him these three reports are garbage, and he went ahead and pushed it forward anyway. All right, we get some more blue text, and that is hard to read. One scant, unclear, and unverifiable fragment of a sentence from a single human sort report published under DCIA Brennan's December 2016 order constitutes the only classified information cited by the ICA for its judgment that Putin desired to help Trump's chances of victory when possible. All right, so fair enough. They're reiterating that point, and we'll see if they give us any more detail. Let me see. Basically repeating itself quite a bit here. It's saying, it's a fragment. Don't want to reread too much, so let me skim this. The unclear fragment, shown in bold, is part of a sentence in a redaction that reads, redaction. Putin had made this decision to leak DNC emails after he had come to believe that the Democratic nominee had better odds of winning the US presidential election, and that Trump, whose victory Putin was counting on, most likely would not be able to pull off a convincing victory. So the fragment that this assertion relies on are these 6 words: whose victory Putin was counting on. It is those 6 words in a paragraph in an unverifiable report that did not meet intelligence community standards. Those 6 words form the basis of the assertion that Russia was doing this to help Trump. That is a bombshell. That is a major development for all the discussion, all the media attention on Russia doing all of this to help Donald Trump. It comes back to these 6 words: whose victory Putin was counting on, in an unverifiable report that was heavily discounted and criticized by senior CIA officials. So that is a major development. Senior CIA operations officer said of the fragment, "We don't know what was meant by that." And 5 people read it 5 ways. All right. That's not a good look. Yeah, I mean, that is a little bit open to interpretation, right? I mean, whose victory Putin was counting on. planning on, desired, anticipating. Those are different. You cannot roll those all up and just say he wanted Trump to win. It is open to interpretation. The significance of this fragment to the ICA case that Putin aspired for candidate Trump to win cannot be overstated. All right, so they're emphasizing that for us. I'm going to skip some of that. The report containing the fragment did not directly say or imply that Putin developed a preference for Trump. Again, that it's highlighting it for us. It's emphasizing it. It's not saying that Putin preferred Trump. It's saying whose victory Putin was counting on, which again, I mean, that's open to interpretation because counting on, that could mean anticipating. That does not mean, counting on in the same way that, like we're rooting for something. And that is good to call out. Let's see if there's anything else important. The ICA does not address the sources and motivations, which were in part driven by strong dislike for Putin and his regime, and that the source had a anti-Trump bias, according to CIA officers. Interesting. So there is a source for this report that had an anti-Trump bias, and that's the guy who wrote 6 vague, subjectively worded words in a paragraph, and that formed the basis of a conclusion. Let's see if there's anything else. Yeah. None of the confirmed Russian activities, leaks, public statements, social media messaging, and traditional propaganda corroborate the ICA interpretation of the fragment, because these activities were all consistent with Putin's objectives to undermine faith in U.S. democracy without regard for candidate Trump's fate. Interesting. Brennan overruled CIA professionals to publicly and to publish and cite the ambiguous fragment. So they're going to lean into this a little bit more. Don't want to repeat a whole bunch of stuff, but experienced CIA officers responsible for Russia reporting, evaluating raw intelligence, and ensuring that human reporting meets the threshold for publication, initially omitted the confusing fragment from the first version of the report, which was published on December 20th. Brennan countermanded their decision, however, in order that the fragment be included so that it could be cited in the ICA. A revised report was published on December 28th. Interesting. Senior CIA operations officer described concerns about relying on unclear reporting as the only evidence for the significant judgment that Putin aspired to help Trump. The officer explains that while most of the ICA was well done, ideally they should have eliminated the political judgment because the fragment lacked the clarity needed to support such a significant claim. And another colleague or another officer said, "We don't have direct information that Putin wanted to get Trump elected." That is huge. I mean, that is huge. You talk about the collusion narrative. You talk about what was being reported on CNN and all the major media outlets from 2017 through 2019. The narrative has always been Russia did this to help Donald Trump. They wanted to get Donald Trump. They preferred Donald Trump. We've heard it over and over and over. And all of that comes back to this data point right here. It is a vague report from a source with an anti-Trump bias, and it is unclear what was even meant by that fragment. Brennan overruled his own senior officials who had discarded this report and counted it as unreliable to include that, and that formed the basis that has driven this entire narrative for years and years. That is huge. That is a bombshell finding of this report. All of it circles back to 6 words. I might repeat that a few more times because that is huge. We're just going to keep working through this. This judgment had serious implications for confidence in U.S. democracy, and it would be considered a major analytic judgment by ICA standards. Yeah, I bet it would. Let me see. The ICA used an abbreviated description of the source that, without further mention of the problems associated with the fragment, misleads the reader to conclude that Putin wanted Trump to win. Interesting. So then they mislabeled it. Is that what they're saying? Possibility. Let me see. ICA fails to explain the misgivings of CIA professionals about the lack of clarity of the fragment, possibility of other interpretations of it. That fragment does not actually say Putin aspired to help Trump win, or that it is not known how the information was acquired. The ICA text, we assess the influence campaign aspired to help Trump's chances of victory when possible, is supported using an abbreviated source description. The established source with secondhand access reported that Putin was counting on the president-elect's victory. So to dig into that a little bit more, what they said up above was that fragment does not say that he aspired to help Trump's chances, and that's what they're saying. Like, they clarified it to say something that was not actually said in the fragment. So that is misleading. Let me see if there's anything else. That is highly redacted. Ooh. The identified subsource of paragraphs 2 and 3 had authoritative insight into redacted, but exact circumstances in which the subsource obtained the information on Putin's plans were not explicitly clear. Subsource, we have a little bit of history. I mean, when you hear subsource, you think about the Steele dossier. Hopefully, these subsources are a little more credible. But with the influence of the dossier, it raises the question. I mean, to what extent are they referencing, Igor Danchenko or somebody like that, or is this something else? We'll see if they tell us. ICA failed to clarify. The source did not say that President Putin preferred candidate Trump. Yeah, exactly. It is not known how the subsource obtained the information, all right, and thus whether the fragment reflected the subsource opinion of Putin's inner thoughts, Putin's actual statements made to the subsource, or some third person's opinion relayed to the subsource, who then relayed these to the established source. So now we're talking about the other side of it, right? The fragment isn't just subjective, open to interpretation. Now they're talking about the vetting of how this source got the information. And they're saying they don't know. They have no idea whether this was opinion of the subsource. They don't know if it was hearsay. They don't know if they heard out of Putin's own mouth, which is obviously critical, right? I mean, if you're gonna say that Russia had a preference for Donald Trump, you'd like to think it's more than one source contributing to that. But if it's going to be one source, you need to know how they figured that out, right? Is it opinion? Are they just speculating, or did they hear it? I mean, were they in a room with Vladimir Putin and he said, boy, I really want Donald Trump. I'm gonna hack the DNC and see how I can help him. So that is second black eye on the intelligence community, to have an unverified report in a vaguely worded paragraph form the basis of that assertion. That's not good. Key sentence fragment used to make the judgment was ambiguous. Counting on could equate to expected instead of the ICA interpretation of preferred. And that's kind of what I was saying before. I mean, counting on could mean anything. And that without further clarification did not suggest or imply that Putin's orders were intended to help Trump win. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, counting on, you could say planning on, right? If I think somebody's going to win, I'm going to plan on that, right? So that's interesting. Got a couple redactions. Did not mention that it was not possible for the established source to ask the subsource to clarify what they meant by the puzzling fragment. So now we're talking about a couple layers of source information. It's not just a source that we're even hearing from directly. It's a source who can't go back to the subsource. Interesting. It was not possible to have the established source ask the subsource to clarify what they meant by the puzzling fragment. Okay, that's troubling. That is troubling. If you were on the Spaces chat last week, I think it was, Walk of Fire kind of raised the question, and that was whether Christopher Steele had a relationship in funneling information to the CIA as well. And this makes me think there might be a little bit of merit there to what Walk of Fire was suggesting. And I'm not reporting that. I'm not saying that is the case here, but I am uncomfortable with a source, and now we're hearing about a subsource, and they can't connect to clarify what they meant. That's not good. We need to find out who that source is. We need to know who that subsource is as much as possible. Another conclusion, the ICA failed to acknowledge alternative interpretations of the unclear fragment suggested by events at the time it was collected. All right, alternative interpretations of the unclear fragment. So we're talking about 6 words, and we're going on for pages here. So we're just going to keep going, I suppose. The ICA only considers one single source interpretation of its meaning, that Putin wanted Trump to win, when events suggested another, more plausible explanation. Even assuming that the fragment was not a garble between any of the subsource or established source redaction, and discounting the unknown circumstances under which the subsource obtained the information. This is bad. This is really bad. They have no idea where the subsource got it. They're having trouble getting a hold of the source. They can't clarify it. They don't even know if it's being reported from the subsource accurately. This is not good. Discounting the unknown circumstances under which the subsource obtained the information, the ICA made no effort to explain how the fragment's ambiguous wording indicated that Putin aspired to elect Trump. The original report does not directly say, as the ICA implies, that Putin launched leak operations to help Trump win. That's not good. That's not good. I mean, we're kind of repeating a lot of the similar things here, but every word of this is damning. Not good. The ICA also fails to consider alternative, more plausible explanation for the fragment's meaning, suggested by the context of events during early July, when the information was acquired. Ooh. Okay. Wondering when Steele's dossier report number 95 was submitted, because I think it was around that time. And I think it was report 95 where Steele reported that Putin had approved this hacking plan. So timing is suspicious, very suspicious, because that's when the information was acquired. So it's contemporaneous to when Steele was reporting on this. Boy, that's troubling. The fragment could instead be read that Putin expected a Trump victory. That's what I said earlier. Yeah, he counted on could mean expected. He counted on it. No, he was just expecting him to win at the Republican convention. So it's not even necessarily interesting. Okay, it's not even necessarily the general election. He was expecting a victory at the Republican convention, which was only 2 weeks away. So I think Trump was the presumptive nominee on May 4th. So I don't know about this necessarily. He was the presumptive nominee on May 4th. I think the convention was a couple months later, or at least a month later. So if Putin was thinking this, then Putin's not that smart. I think Putin's smarter than this, but it raises the possibility that it was a convention. So that's interesting. I think there was a little bit of discussion at the time of, some coup to like replace Donald Trump, but it's unclear, right? We just don't have the context. The fragment referred to decisions made by Putin in early July, when the Republican convention's outcome was still uncertain due to active efforts to deny Trump and a majority of convention delegates. Okay, so it actually says that. I didn't read that before, but I think that is true. There was some discussion there about replacing Donald Trump. I don't know. I can't remember how serious those efforts really were, though. I don't remember feeling that Donald Trump was going to get replaced. So that, I don't know about that, but it is possible, and it was a topic of discussion. The fragment thus may reflect the subsource's view that Putin counted on a Trump victory in the Republican July primary, but not the November general election against Clinton. Well, it could be a primary. I think they still have primaries going on. I mean, that would be very unusual to comment on, but yeah, it's possible. It could refer to anything. That's fair. Let's see here. All right, so they're offering some alternatives. I don't know if I put a lot of weight in that one, but fair enough. It does present a viable alternative. The ICA mischaracterized the fragment supporting the high confidence judgments. All right. Oh, I got a message here. Just got to check this. All right. Going to continue here. To judge with high confidence, as the ICA does, that Putin's goal was to help Trump win would, per guidance, require clear and reliable reports from multiple sources. And that's what we were saying earlier. I mean, you want to hear from more than one source, certainly, and the reports have to be clear. Moreover, these reports would need to be of sufficient quality to confidently explain Russian actions that were not consistent with helping Trump win, and also rule out alternative explanations for the Russian influence operations. The ICA failed to meet these standards. Going to skip a little bit. Let me see here. Gives us a little bit of confidence definitions. Let me see. The NSA justification for not signing on with the CIA FBI high confidence judgment on Putin's intentions to help candidate Trump, NSA preferred medium, highlights the weakness of the evidence for this major judgment. Well, the NSA, I mean, they're only marginally better. To have medium confidence in a sentence fragment from a subsource and a source with an anti-Trump bias, that is not heartwarming. I mean, unless the NSA had a different, additional information. Let me see. So Admiral Rogers testified it ultimately boils down to human source that did not have direct access. I didn't find the level of corroboration that led me to high confidence. I didn't see multiple sources. So this is, I hope Walker Fire frees up, because Walker Fire was kind of raising this question earlier on a stream. I think it was last week. It is possible that Christopher Steele had connections with the CIA. I mean, he was an intelligence guy. You think about overseas collection, and Christopher Steele was a British operative. That is mostly in the CIA's domain. So if it related to domestic activities, you would think, okay, it's going to go to the CIA, as many of the dossier reports did. But to the extent that, there could be reports or reporting that are more foreign in nature, and that would include, information on Putin's intentions, that could be funneled through other vectors, going to the CIA. Maybe Christopher Steele passed it through British intelligence. Maybe he's got contacts with the CIA. So I just want to put that out there, because the timing is very suspicious. They're saying they got this source reporting in early July 2016, and that is right in the wheelhouse of when Christopher Steele was reporting the same thing in his dossier reports. So that is a question that we're going to have to run down at some point. We'll continue reading here. The ICA includes a scope and sourcing statement describing the reliability of the key CIA human reporting that is misleading. The ICA notes that key judgments are based on a single well-established source. Boy, I hate the bolstering language there. We make some judgments based on reporting of an established clandestine source with secondhand access through identified subsources. The source is well established, and other examples of redacted reporting have been corroborated. Boy, that sounds so familiar. That sounds like Christopher Steele. That is very consistent with what they were telling us about Steele. The established source with secondhand access provided us our only specific information on Vladimir Putin's order to pass collected material to WikiLeaks. The timing of the formal influence campaign, the existence of specific planned SVR efforts, some specific details of Putin's views of Secretary Clinton, and the reported role of FSB's hacking operations related to the U.S. election. Boy, oh man. That sounds like Christopher Steele. That sounds like Christopher Steele. I don't know if I can say that 100%, but all of that is very, very consistent with Christopher Steele and the dossier reports his writing and his reporting. We'll have to keep reading. I wonder if we can figure that out. Although the ICA correctly describes primary sources reporting history, it does not explain that information a primary source passes on from a subsource is only as good as the subsource's access, knowledge, and bias. If those factors are unknown, then confidence in information is affected accordingly. Okay. When a source sends a report that is unclear, the utility of the information is limited until it can be clarified. All right, I'm going to skip some of this. Let me see if there's anything else. Brennan ordered the publication of a second substandard report from an unknown subsource, cited by the ICA to allege that Putin preferred Trump. This information was both unverified and implausible. And like the unclear fragment, CIA professionals originally declined to publish it when it was first collected. It was only published on Brennan's orders after the election on December 16th and was subsequently used without caveats to source the first bullet of evidence for the judgment that Putin developed a clear preference for candidate Trump. So you think about this in context of what Tulsi Gabbard released a couple weeks ago, or it might have been last week. And she's saying that after the election, or as far as the ICA goes, to the extent they had additional intelligence cited that they had gathered since the election, she told us that was the Steele dossier. And this is consistent with that. So what they appear to be saying here is that Christopher Steele and Igor Danchenko are the source of these major developments or these changes. So I think we're talking about Christopher Steele and Igor Danchenko here. This would be consistent with what Tulsi put out. We're starting the stream a little bit early, so maybe somebody's out there already confirming that. But just doing this on the fly with you all, as I read it, that is Christopher Steele, and that would make sense with what Tulsi put out. Brennan ordered the publication. Okay, we already read that. As early as February 2016, a Russian political expert possessed a plan recommended engagement with Trump's team because of the prospects for improved U.S. relations. Okay. The ICA bullet text is alarming, implying the existence of a Russian plan for engagement with the Trump campaign that most readers would see as strong evidence of President Putin showing a clear preference for candidate Trump. But the ICA omits critical report context, which, had it been made available to the reader, would show the report to be implausible, if not ridiculous, and missing so many key details has to be unusable. That sounds like Christopher Steele. That is classic Christopher Steele. It's, boy, it sounds good, and then you think about it, and it's like, this is trash. Like, this can't be true. CIA operations officers declined to publish a report when it was inquired in February 2016, considering it odd and lacking authoritativeness. It was only disseminated in December 2016 on Brennan's post-election full review order to put out previously unpublished information. This is looking pretty damning. February 2016, I want to call this fairly. February 2016 would not be consistent with the Steele dossier as we understand it. Now, Christopher Steele was active. He was looking into Donald Trump for some period. And then the first dossier report, as we understand it, didn't come until a few months later. But again, if this is, Walker might be on top of this. He might have called this. If that February 2016 report came from Christopher Steele, it's going to change. It's going to be a game changer. It's going to change our understanding of what happened. Let me see what else we have here. Right. Second report's context warning. Context. There's a couple redactions here. The CIA can neither independently vouch for redaction, vetting, or validation of the ultimate source, nor the ultimate source's access to the reported information. The document contains no classification. The document did not contain a specific date or identify the originator. All right. Let's see what else we have. ICA analysis cites the second report prominently, but omits critical context that would cast doubt on the veracity and anti-Trump bias of the source. The ICA obscures the implausibility of the report by vaguely referring to a plan without describing its details. The details were important. They always are, because they were so peculiar as likely to cause readers to question the report's legitimacy. All right. Interesting. When the ICA calls a Russian plan for engagement with Trump that was actually an anonymous email proposal to place a lot of redactions on Trump's election team in order to formulate a mutually acceptable agenda between Trump and Putin. This is Christopher Steele. This is Christopher Steele. This is everything that Tulsi Gabbard offered us a conclusion on last week. So Gabbard put that out in the timeline document, and she said that post-election, the only thing that changed is they went back and they got the information from Christopher Steele. But what some of these details are new. These are absolutely some of these new details. A February 2016 report. That opens up the question about additional channels and vectors that dossier reports and apparently new dossier reports that we have never heard of were reaching the intelligence community. But this is very consistent with the dossier as well. So the idea that they were going to change the platform was a big data point in the Steele dossier. And they're talking about, in order to formulate a mutually acceptable agenda. I think that's what they're referring to. There is no explanation of how this would be done or why candidate Trump would want a well-known pro-Kremlin official on his campaign team and endure the media furor that would result. The ICA bullet obscured the source as a blank service when it actually came from the blank service. Had the bullet clarified that it was from the blank, some readers might have known blank anti-Trump bias at the time, which would further undermine the judgment. There was no security justification for obscuring the identity of the blank service, as the ICA was written for the president, who was cleared for everything. All right, I'm trying to hash that out a little bit more. So, got redactions. Got to love the redactions. It obscured the source as a blank service when it actually came from the blank service. Walkfire is going to be able to help us out with that. Based on the size of those redactions, I think Walkfire will nail that. We'll be able to figure that out with a probably in less than an hour's worth of work. Walkfire will just need to count the characters of that, and that should be easy. The ICA made no mention of Kiev's documented objections to candidate Trump. Interesting. Okay. So over here, we're talking about a bunch of redacted stuff. And then over here, we're starting to talk about Ukraine. So might be a connection there between the redactions and this context. So ICA made no mention of Kiev's documented objections to candidate Trump. Ukrainian ambassador in Washington took the unusual step during the campaign of publishing an open letter. And this came up during the Trump impeachment. That's not interesting to me. I'm going to skip that. Brennan ordered the publication of a third substandard report, also from an unknown subsource that was cited to, can't read that word, Putin's preference for Trump. So something in context. To support the topic sentence, Putin, his advisors, and the Russian government developed a clear preference for Trump. The ICA quotes information from an established source, in quotations, but without clarifying that the ultimate source of the information is unknown. Oh boy, this is a Steele dossier. they had no idea. They had no idea who the subsources were, and if they knew who Igor Danchenko's subsources were, they would have never ran with this, because the subsources were just his childhood friends. They had no idea. None of the subsources in the Steele dossier were in position to know anything. So if this gets confirmed that this is all Steele dossier related, and again, I'm starting the stream early. Somebody's out there probably confirming that right now. This is pretty bad. The ICA describes the information in terms that most readers would view as more evidence that President Putin would have a clear preference for candidate Trump. But this is only accomplished by omitting key context details, and that's classic. I mean, we've seen that in many instances. As with the other two substandard reports, CIA professionals originally declined to publish this information when it was acquired. So again, if this is Christopher Steele, Walkfire called the game. So we're talking now, if this is Christopher Steele, he had a vector to distribute some materials to the CIA, and we have not heard about that yet. So hat tip Walkfire. If this gets confirmed, Walkfire, like he always is 1,000 miles ahead of everybody else. The information was acquired from the source via a secondhand source. Gotta love that. In blank 2016, but was not published until December 19th. I wonder why they redacted that. I mean, that appears to be a date. Based on the size of that redaction, it looks like a short worded month. So you might be looking at something like June or July. That's very weird. It's very weird that they would redact the date on that. The ultimate source of the information is unknown. Blank. While the established source received it from an identified subsource, the ultimate source of the information is not known, which the ICA failed to clarify. That is a mouthful right there. While the established source received it from an identified subsource, the ultimate source of the information is not known. Okay. That's no bueno. So the established source, they know who the source is. The identified subsource, they know who the subsource is, but they have no idea where that guy got it from. Interesting. Redaction, it is unclear if the original source had access to Putin's private statements. No, he didn't. I can say 100% he had no idea. Or those of his inner circle, or if this was the subsource's personal opinions of Putin's personal thoughts, or if this was a garble or misunderstanding, or if this reflected some other unknown person's opinions. Boy, oh boy, you're gonna say that Russia preferred Donald Trump, and you don't know if it's the subsource's personal opinions. You don't know if it's a garble or misunderstanding, or if it reflected some unknown person's opinions. So for that key assertion that we have heard so much about, that underpins the whole narrative, really. I mean, the whole idea of Russian collusion, the whole idea of Russian interfering to help Donald Trump, that we have heard so many times. We've heard it, every year since this happened from at least one member of Congress, and they don't know. They have no idea where that came from. That's not good, and that's the only intelligence they had, was some unknown person, and they had no idea. Little text box, the third report context warning. While the source obtained the information from the identified subsource, the ultimate source was not known. They're repeating it. Boy, they repeat themselves a lot. Additionally, the degree to which the ultimate source was aware of the private comments and views of the Russian president was unclear. I mean, it's classic, right? I mean, they did not vet this intelligence. They had no idea where this came from. The ICA also misquotes the report to indicate that Putin and his inner circle strongly preferred Republicans. All right. The phrase strongly preferred Republicans does not appear in the raw intelligence report. That's not good. So these intelligence officials are pushing a narrative that is unsupported by the scant trash intelligence that they managed to collect. They're getting sentence fragments that are subjective, and then they're going probably 2 steps beyond that to throw out conclusions that don't appear in the actual source. So that is not good. The unknown subsource said that historically the Kremlin had found it easier to reach agreements with U.S. presidents from the Republican Party, and that this was because Republicans were less concerned with issues that were unpleasant for Russia, such as democracy and human rights. Republicans, that, I don't know, that might be true in recent years. It is funny because Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, and Emancipation Proclamation, but yeah, certainly true. Probably more true in recent years, but that is kind of funny. The ICA did not take this basic analytic step. We had a redaction there. However, comparing the plausibility of the unknown subsource claims to the documented policies of the past 3 Republican presidents, all of whom featured democracy and human rights as cornerstones of their foreign policies, it brings to mind President Reagan's famous quote, "What the hell are they doing?" Brings to mind President Reagan's famous quote, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," or President W. Bush's comments on the axis of evil. I don't know. They're reaching there. There's a little bit of theatrics to that section of this report. I don't know. I wouldn't say President Bush was, a democracy and human rights champion. But I don't know. We're just going to discard that. I don't think there's a whole lot of merit to that. Boy, we cannot read that text. Light blue, and it does not print very well. So no idea what that header is. Even part of the ICA's own classified text, based on the reliable reporting, contradicts the information contained in the third substandard report. This raised further questions about why, contrary to criteria, the third report was cited as evidence. Yeah, I would think so. I mean, they have no idea who the source is, the subsource of the subsource to the third report. They have no idea where this guy heard this. And the tangible, reliable reporting they had, they discarded and they used the garbage. So not good. Some senior Russian officials worried a Trump information would bring hardline blank security advisors, or that a Republican-controlled Congress would not support measures that would be beneficial to Russia. That's probably true. You think about like John McCain at the time, or Lindsey Graham. Certainly, I would not think Russia would be overly excited to see a bunch of Republicans in there, at least in 2016. I mean, with those two guys in there, hard to say. Noting that, let me see, those who hold positions in a Trump administration, should he win, will likely adhere to conservative anti-Russian positions. So they're talking about what got excluded. So we didn't get the header on this page. There appears to be, information that contradicts the third substandard report. Yeah, that's fair. Additionally, both the historical record and source materials for the ICA's Annex D glossed over. And we might gloss over this section. There are no Russian plans to target any Democratic presidential candidate for active measures because any Democratic candidate is preferable to President Reagan, and a bunch of redactions. Fair enough. So there's a few public statements out there that they're going through. DNI Clapper. Despite unknown sourcing, reliable contrary evidence, and implausible claims, then Director of National Intelligence James Clapper, responding to a request to double-check the sourcing behind the judgment, responded in a letter to the committee that he had nonetheless endorsed the ICA judgment. And his comments were, "I have reviewed the underlying source material myself and entirely concur in the judgment of the analysts, which I believe is consistent with the standards of analytical tradecraft and objectivity." That's not good. That is not a good look for DNI Clapper. He's saying that I looked at it myself and I think they did the right thing relying on this unverified subsource reporting that we don't know who reported it. Another header here. The ICA falsely claimed, not getting all the text there, substandard report was corroborated. Okay, I think it says the ICA falsely claimed that the third substandard report was corroborated, and apparently that is not true. The ICA text is misleadingly drafted to suggest that some of the qualities of candidate Trump align with Putin's preference for international partners, citing the third substandard report as evidence for the ICA judgment that Putin developed a clear preference for candidate Trump. The ICA further claimed information from the third report was corroborated by liaison, diplomatic, and press reporting, as well as signals intelligence. But in every following citation, none were found to corroborate the ICA claims. Boy, oh boy, this is getting pretty bad. This you think about, like, in an academic context, you write a paper and you throw a bunch of sources out there, and then the sources don't, support your write-up. You get in trouble for that. And here we're talking about professional intelligence analysts, and apparently the citations don't support the claims and the conclusions, and we've seen that already. They're changing words around. They're describing them in an inaccurate way. They're bolstering information that is false or that they have no verification of. This is not good. The ICA also used the third substandard report to claim that members of Putin's inner circle had compared Trump to other world leaders with business interests. Okay, business interests that Putin could work with, using this part of his supporting evidence for the judgment that Putin aspired to help Trump win. Let me see what else. The cited reporting didn't mention Trump at all and was from 2014, before Trump was a candidate. All right. The cited signals intelligence also didn't mention Trump. A few redactions. Cited diplomatic report is a post-election overview of Moscow from the U.S. ambassador that references a media opinion item by a Russian pundit suggesting that Trump and Putin should work together like businessmen, which is hardly a corroboration of Putin's inner circle preferring Republicans or businessmen. That's true. So they're criticizing this further. They're essentially saying, Putin's going to like Donald Trump because of the business interests they could work together. And to cite that, they're using stuff that doesn't mention Trump. They're using stuff that was written by Russian pundits, not Putin's inner circle. So very misleading. Ironically, the same embassy cable quotes a minister of Russia as saying Trump's election, "We do not feel any euphoria," saying a bipartisan anti-Russian consensus. So they get one document, and it actually contradicts the conclusion that they use it to offer. So that's not good. Finding number 4, the ICA excluded significant intelligence that contradicted its judgments that Putin aspired to help Trump win. The ICA excluded intelligence that contradicted its judgment. Interesting. All right. So you can't just throw everything in there that supports a conclusion. You have to include the stuff that doesn't support your conclusion and let people evaluate it. And apparently they did not do that. The ICA selectively omitted quotes from key human and signet reports that contradicted the judgments on Putin's intelligence, while conversely it included quotes from those same reports that supported the ICA thesis. This was done multiple times to include citations of 2 foundational sources for the ICA. So this is really, really bad. And this is actually something that I picked up in some of my own reporting based on a few sources that I have. Basically, they, from what I understand, there were directives given down from the top. And these directives said, when something does not support the idea that Russia wanted Trump to win, throw it out. And if something supports it, put it in. And make sure that it establishes that Russia wanted Trump to win and interfered to help him. And I picked that up in some of my own reporting. And here it is right here. This cherry picking of reports is an important indicator for evaluating ICA tradecraft. Absolutely. By selectively quoting a report repeatedly, the authors both demonstrated their regard for the value of the source while simultaneously providing evidence of disregard for intelligence community standards on objectivity and consideration of contrary information. Yeah, that's not a good look. If you get one document and you're not talking about, you think this document is credible and that document's not credible. You're talking about one single document. And within that document, you're selecting paragraphs that support one contention. And in the same document, you're leaving out things that contradict your own, your reporting. So they're going to give some examples, it looks like. The ICA selectively quoted a key report that contradicted judgments on Putin's intentions. Although the ICA quoted the reliable report 4 times, it omitted the most critical element of the report that strongly conflicted with the ICA major judgments on Putin's intentions. Missing, a couple redactions here, missing from the ICA was significant intelligence that blank, a longtime Putin confidant told a sensitive contact, blank, that Putin told him he did not care who won the election. Putin had often outlined the weaknesses of both major candidates. Putin asserted that in either case, Russia was strategically placed to outmaneuver either one. So they're basically saying Trump didn't care, or excuse me, not Trump. Putin didn't care who won. And that portion of a document was omitted. And this is apparently a reliable report. So they're pushing really hard this narrative that Putin wanted Donald Trump to win, and they're excluding and cherry picking reports to make that conclusion viable. So what they're showing here is an intentional plan, really. I mean, they're outlining willful intent to disregard reliable information, to cherry pick reports, and a willful intent to establish a narrative that was unsupported. See if there's anything else worth reading here. Yeah, they're talking about Putin. Putin did not care. I mean, and I don't know why he would necessarily. Regardless of the election outcome, gradually get rid of the bilateral dialogue of irritants. Yep. Some redactions. Let's go to the next page. Let's see what else we got here. Got some redactions. Okay, apparently there's some kind of report which said Russia was planning for candidate Clinton's victory because they knew where she stood, and despite media stories, Russia could work with her. According to blank, a collaborative source with excellent access, but whose report had not been corroborated. All right, so there's at least some indication there that Putin would not mind Hillary Clinton, and certainly, I mean, she was Secretary of State, and she had been around the block a few times, so certainly I would buy that Russia knew they could work with her, and even within like the Steele dossier reports, you got like Chuck Dolan and some of these other people connected to Clinton that also are well connected to Russia. So it certainly was not, this entire narrative that Trump associates were close with Russia. That's incomplete, because if anything, some of the Clinton connected operatives had better access. Actually, they had better contacts than Trump associates did. Certainly in the case of Chuck Dolan. Let's see what else we got here. Much of the same. I'm not going to read that. The ICA omitted reliable evidence that Putin's key advisors showed significant downsides to a Trump presidency. Okay, so they saw significant downsides to a Trump presidency. The ICA selectively excluded information from reliable intelligence reports that senior Russian officials had serious reservations about how a potential Trump administration could be bad for Moscow and could complicate repairing relations with Washington. I would buy that. I mean, Trump was, he's a wild card. The significance of that omission becomes apparent when reading the ICA's judgment of what Russian officials thought, which pushed the clear preference for Trump judgment that was directly contradicted by the raw reports cited by the ICA as sources. Let's see. Basically, they're weighing into that a little bit more. Gonna skip that box. Let's see. Nothing really major to highlight there. Yeah, they're basically saying Russia was pretty worried about it, and the ICA does not mention that. Oops. Next page. By omitting the below evidence, the ICA denied the reader access to significant intelligence that undermines the major judgment that Putin preferred Trump. Few quotes here. So it is important to be mindful that those who would hold positions in a Trump administration, should he win, would likely adhere to conservative anti-Russian positions. Heard that earlier. The implications of a Trump victory and an ability to maintain control over both the House and Senate are serious. Legislatively, a conservative victory would probably be a dead end for developing Russian-U.S. relations. Few more statements here. Fair point. I mean, they exclude information. Don't need to say that too many more times. Hard to read that header. Let's see. Investigators as well as the ICA authors were denied access to a trove of information on grounds of executive or congressional privilege. So this appears to tie into, this seems to tie into what was released yesterday. So they had a bunch of emails, a bunch of Russian intelligence reports that they had gotten from the Dutch, and we reported on that yesterday, and March and April, we kind of got into that. What the ICA says, unexamined Russian material. Yeah. So they're in possession of SVR cyber-enabled collection exfiltrated from U.S. government and think tank entities, dated at least blank, which may inform the further judgments. Yeah, nobody reviewed the data. So that's something we learned yesterday. And we reported on that with Sleuth News. And essentially, the Dutch were collecting a bunch of intelligence on Russian intelligence groups. And that includes SVR. Between Fool and I, our opinion is maybe Shaltai Voltai as well. A little bit unclear at that point. But effectively, what yesterday was really all about, they had the same source. The Dutch were providing the CIA with everything. So the Russian intelligence reports, the the information on the Clinton plan intelligence, the Renteria memo, all of that came from the Dutch. And what appears to have happened, and we kind of learned more about this yesterday, is that they also exfiltrated the emails that potentially comprise or support those Russian intelligence reports. So we didn't have that firmly established yesterday, until yesterday, but I had gotten some reporting on this in March and April, and one of these emails specifically is apparently from Jennifer Palmieri of the Clinton campaign, sent to Leonard Bernardo of Open Society Foundations, and he is somebody that was hacked by Russia. And one of these emails, apparently, allegedly, has Palmieri detailing this Clinton plan and saying that part of the plan involves having the FBI amplify the allegations. And that, among many other emails in these 8 thumb drives, has not been verified. Nobody went and verified that, which is damning, because within this information, I mean, if the Clinton plan intelligence is correct, if that email is authentic, you could say, yes, the Russians hacked, these accounts, the SVR did, but maybe they are not responsible for the Fancy Bear or the Guccifer 2.0 persona, because that is my opinion. That is my conclusion of after years of analysis. The SVR was doing intelligence collection. They were not doing an interference campaign. What appears to have happened is the Russians hacked these groups. They collected intelligence and realized that Clinton was planning an operation against them, which must have been really confusing for the Russians. And my conclusion is that the DNC hack is spoofed, and they masqueraded as Russians to craft this environment that was going to be favorable for the Steele dossier. Obviously, that's a big focus of mine, but that's kind of the gravity of this additional information that nobody went and verified. So I threw that in there for you. So let's see if we learn anything more. Intelligence consists of cyber data exfiltrated by the Russians beginning in 2014 from computer systems at blank and political groups and think tanks. That's true. So beginning in 2014, so a significant breach, it sounds like, and sounds like quite a bit of information. The ICA footnote affords the reader no insight, however, into why this evidence was not reviewed or the potential significance of the additional material to ICA judgments. Senior FBI analysts told investigators there were many victims from these Russian hacks. Same analyst said that he argued this intelligence should have been shared with director's fusion cell analysts because it may have clarified the scope of Moscow's operational capabilities and potential leverage. So yeah, and that the fusion cell, according to the John Durham report, the fusion cell was set up because of the Clinton plan intelligence. And what Brennan explained away is that they weren't concerned with the substance of the information. They were just concerned that it existed, more or less. But nobody went and verified that. We heard about the briefing to President Obama on the Clinton plan intelligence specifically, which happened in July 2016. It was pretty clear, and apparently these additional emails offer the ability. They could have verified the Clinton plan intelligence. They, potentially they had the emails that supported that intelligence assessment by Russia, and they didn't go verify it. So not a good look. The analysts explained that the Obama administration denied ICA drafters access to this intelligence on grounds of executive or congressional privilege. Not good, because Obama was briefed in July on the Clinton plan intelligence, and now they're saying the Obama administration exerted executive and congressional privilege over it to deny access to, we're not talking low-level intelligence people. We're talking about, senior officials of the CIA and our most prestigious intelligence agencies could not go look at this, which is critical, right? I mean, we're talking about a major conclusion on a major supposed operation, and they're being denied access. Finding number 5, the ICA disregarded Russian behavior that undermined its judgment that Putin aspired to help Trump win. Kind of went over that earlier, so let's see if there's anything new here. The ICA ignored that Putin's decision not to help Trump in the closing weeks of the campaign was not consistent with the ICA's judgments. Let's see. Yeah, so they're saying Putin chose not to leak more discrediting material on Clinton in order to help Trump's chances of victory. Fair enough. Okay, the GRU warned Putin in early September that Trump would lose the election without the intervention of remarkable derogatory information on Clinton. Interesting. As the election entered the decisive stages in October, Putin possessed proven low-risk cutout platforms for leaking documents via DC Leaks, WikiLeaks, and Guccifer 2.0, and an arsenal of material on Clinton. I do not agree with that conclusion, but certainly for purposes of this document, if you accept that Russia was behind all of that, yeah, they had the ability to leak information. The SVR held particularly damaging information that would have likely created greater scandals than materials already leaked by the GRU. I would believe that. I mean, if you go back to the emails released by WikiLeaks, there was not much in there that was really damaging. I mean, there's some donor information I think got leaked. There's a few things that raised questions about her interactions with the DNC and the DNC's interactions, particularly with regard to Bernie Sanders. I know that was a big story. But as far as Clinton goes, there was not much in that release that hurt Hillary Clinton. Debbie Wasserman Schultz definitely got hurt, but beyond that, I mean, there's nothing too significant. So let's see, next page. Okay, they're talking about polling information. Yeah, they're saying Russia could have done more. Fair enough. Skip that page. Okay, so there's more information that Putin chose not to leak. As of September 2016, SVR had DNC information that President Obama and party leaders found that the state of Secretary Clinton's health to be extraordinarily alarming and felt it could have a serious negative impact on her election prospects. Interesting. Her health information was being kept in strictest secrecy, and even close advisors were not being fully informed. The SVR possessed DNC communications that Clinton was suffering from intensified psycho-emotional problems, including uncontrolled fits of anger, aggression, and cheerfulness. Clinton was placed on a daily regimen of heavy tranquilizers, and while afraid of losing, she remained obsessed with a thirst for power. The SVR possessed DNC communications that Clinton. So they're saying SVR had emails of DNC staffers talking a lot of shit about Hillary Clinton, and they didn't release those emails. And that goes back to the point I made earlier. I mean, when you got the emails on WikiLeaks, there's nothing that actually took laid a glove on Hillary Clinton, and that never made sense to me, because in any organization, there's going to be some discontent. You're going to have some interns at minimum, at least joking, criticizing somebody like Hillary Clinton. And that never made sense to me, that those never got released through WikiLeaks. And they're saying SVR possessed that. And SVR, by the way, is Cozy Bear. So we're talking about two different things here. Fancy Bear is the group associated with the commonly known DNC hack. SVR is associated with Cozy Bear, who also hacked the DNC. And there are no documents conclusively tied back to SVR. So there's no indication that SVR ever transferred documents to WikiLeaks. SVR also had information that Clinton suffered from type 2 diabetes, ischemic heart disease, deep vein thrombosis, and chronic COPD. SVR possessed a campaign email discussing a plan approved by Secretary Clinton to link Putin and Russian hackers to candidate Trump in order to distract from the Clinton email server. So that's Clinton plan intelligence. Okay, that's important to note because we got the information from the Dutch on the in the form of an intelligence memorandum written up by Russia, but they're saying SVR possessed an email, which was implied by the existence of the intelligence memorandum. Hopefully, we can learn a little bit more about that at some point here. The FSB in August had details of secret meetings with multiple named U.S. religious organizations in which the U.S. State Department representatives offers in exchange for supporting Secretary Clinton significant increases in financing from department funds and the patronage of state in dealing with post-Soviet countries. Ooh. So the FSB, that's a different group now. So SVR and the FSB, a little bit different. And there is a rivalry between the two. So the FSB would actually, that is interesting. That they distinguish it. So they're saying in August had details of secret meetings where Clinton was doing some dirty stuff, offering bribes, essentially, is what that reads to me. FBI Director Comey testified to the committee that in August 2016, the SVR had DNC emails in which the head of the DNC was telling people that Lynch was working to control me and keeping a named member of the Clinton campaign informed on what the FBI was doing. So that's the Renteria memo. That is the Renteria memo about basically Loretta Lynch keeping tabs with the Clinton campaign and letting her know that nothing was going to come of the email server investigation. SVR also had information that DNC leadership and Clinton's foreign policy advisors had heard that U.S. allies in London, Berlin, Paris, and Rome were not optimistic about a Clinton presidency. So they're basically saying some of our allies were talking smack about Clinton, and they didn't put that out there. Interesting. I think it is worth noting, theoretically or in principle, some of these pieces are unverified. I mean, the Clinton plan intelligence, I think it's legitimate, but for the purposes of this document, it is unverified. So we don't know that Russia. Well, they're saying they had the emails, so that's interesting. Comey testified to the committee the SVR had DNC emails supporting the Renteria memo. That's what that says. Interesting. Let's go to the next page. The SVR reported in January 2016 that it had information taken from a U.S. think tank indicating that a high-ranking official in Democratic Party, DNC, knew about application of political pressure. Ooh, all right. This is what I was reporting, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes ago. So this is something that I picked up in March or April on my Substack. This relates to Leonard Bernardo and Jennifer Palmieri. And if you weren't on the call a second ago, I'll repeat it. So Jennifer Palmieri allegedly sent an email to Leonard Bernardo saying that part of the plan was going to have the FBI amplify the allegations that Clinton was spinning up. So that is, I think that's related. In March 2016, the SVR had intercepted discussions between a high-ranking DNC official and U.S. non-governmental organization indicating that a Clinton staffer was receiving updates on FBI's Clinton email investigation from a high-ranking DOJ official. So that again relates to the Renteria memo. So it's interesting they parse that out. Let me go back to here. So here they were saying Comey was testifying that the SVR had DNC emails, technically the same thing. So I don't know why they repeated that twice. They could have just added that, I think. But yeah, there's a Renteria memo. Amanda Renteria was apparently receiving updates, and again, that's unverified. You have to say that, which is hard to reconcile, right? Because in this report, they're saying SVR had emails, and they're quoting James Comey as saying SVR had emails supporting this. So I don't know if I need to use qualifiers. To the extent that anybody is saying the Clinton plan intelligence or the Renteria memo or anything else is fake, that doesn't seem to be the case. And to that extent, as I said earlier, to the extent that anybody doubts the Russian intelligence reports, it sounds like we have the emails. It sounds like the Dutch gave us the emails supporting those Russian intelligence reports. We could look through them today if we wanted to, and at least give some indication of support for the Russian intelligence assessments. Yes, you might have to go to an ISP and get the header information and verify that the emails are legitimate, but it sounds like we have the emails. So that's potentially a bombshell if somebody leans into that and goes and gets it, because you're talking about Clinton had this plan, and it sounds like the Russians had some details on that. Let's see if there's reading anything else here. Voice is getting hoarse. Take a drink of water. Let's see. Is there anything else that's important? ICA did not address the significant strategic implications of what was held back. It does speculate on SVR tactical moves to explain Putin's decision to stop leaking after October. Okay. SVR officers were protective of the accesses they used to derive intelligence reports for Putin, and may have argued to prevent the disclosure of non-public material that, if disclosed, would have endangered continued collection on U.S. decision-making. The ICA speculation on SVR tactical priorities doesn't make sense, given that the media had already reported on Russian intrusions into DNC servers by June. There's another data point here, and I put this out in some of my reporting a couple of months ago. When John Brennan called the head of Russia's FSB, and again, that is a different organization that is separate from the SVR, but Alexander Bortnikov, might not be pronounced that correctly, but when he called them, we don't know what was said on that call. What Brennan has testified to was he warned them to stop interfering in our election, something like that. I don't know if there's a transcript of the call. You think about like the Trump impeachment saga, there's a transcript of that call, or the General Flynn saga, there's a transcript of that call. So you would think there'd be a transcript, but whatever John Brennan said to the Russians, it blew up an entire intelligence network. The Dutch were in there at SVR. Now, that is a separate organization, but they had access, that they were getting some visibility. They were getting the Russian intelligence reports. They were hacking the hacked emails that Russia had collected and providing them all to the United States. And for whatever reason, whatever John Brennan said on that call, it blew the entire intelligence channel up. And that might be, this is speculative, that might be why you had Russians like Sergei Mikhailov and some others that were arrested in the fall of 2016. Ilya Sachkov got arrested. Nature of Russia being what it is, he might not ever get out of prison. So, to the extent they were helping Western intelligence, or if they were, what a shame. What a shame, because this was a valuable intelligence network. We were learning what the Russians knew about us, what they were doing. And rather than continuing to get information, and some of that information raised troubling questions like the Clinton plan intelligence, we blew it up. And maybe those on accident. We don't know. Would love to see that transcript from John Brennan. Let's see. Anything else? Yeah, they're talking about, this was in public reporting. So, to the extent that Russia was still trying to collect information, didn't make sense. Let's see. The ICA did not attempt to explain Russian leaks to damage Trump that were inconsistent with the ICA judgments on Putin's intentions. All right. The ICA does not directly address the GRU's September leaks of emails that were embarrassing to Trump and highly critical of his character. I'm not sure I remember those. Let's see. They give us what that is. GRU associated DC leaks in September 2016 leaked emails belonging to Colin Powell, former Republican Secretary of State. And he did attack Donald Trump. I remember that now. It said Trump is a national disgrace and an international pariah. All his lies and nonsense just pile up. Trump's taking on water. He doesn't have a GOP philosophy or even a conservative philosophy. So that's a fair point. If you're thinking that Russia's doing this to help Trump, why would the Russians put this out from Colin Powell attacking Donald Trump? So that is a fair assessment, and the ICA should have addressed that. These leaks were contrary to the ICA judgments. That's right. Let's see. GRU may have compromised additional personal accounts of leading U.S. political figures from both parties, judging on blanks. Interesting. A little bit more. Let's see what else we got. If Putin wanted Trump to win, it would seem logical that he would not have leaked anti-Trump material. Yeah. Feel like you don't need to say that in a report. I mean, that's obvious in context on what you just said. Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. You wouldn't put out anti-Trump material if you wanted him to win. Let's see. The ICA also failed to adequately examine the disparity in the scope of Russian leaks involving Clinton and Trump. The ICA stops with simply stating the fact that this occurred. All right. What the ICA says, it says, we assess that the SVR and GRU both conducted cyber operations against targets associated with the 2016 U.S. presidential election, including targets associated with both major political parties. The ICA leaves the reader to assume Russia's unequal leak activities were another data point confirming the thesis that Putin aspired to help Trump win. But the ICA fails to consider that Moscow likely had substantially fewer documents available on Trump. Yeah, that is a good point. Trump was new to politics, and Secretary Clinton had been around forever. So that's fair. Clinton's communications profile was larger and more exposed as she ran a well-funded conventional campaign, according to DNC. Trump had a smaller staff, an unconventional campaign, less integrated with RNC, and a smaller footprint. That is absolutely true. If you remember the 2016 election, like one of the lead stories was like Trump has no staffers in this state, right? He's got no boots on the ground, and he had a very small inner circle, and that's largely one of the reasons that they were suggesting Trump could not win the election. And Clinton, I mean, she was a fundraising, legend. You can't take that away from her. She had an absolutely outstanding operation. She had run for president before, obviously. Obviously, her husband had been president. So yeah, she had quite an operation. It makes sense that there would be fewer documents on Trump. That's true. Let's see what else we got. The ICA details the methods Russia employed to leak emails, but does not give sufficient consideration to Clinton's vulnerability to other collection or the capabilities of Russian intelligence services to collect non-cyber sources such as audio or video surveillance of private meetings or intercepts her private calls with foreign leaders, Obama administration officials, campaign managers, or advisors to other sensitive information. Secretary Clinton would have been a Russian intelligence collection target for some 25 years. Yeah, that's true. A few other, yeah. And she used a home email server with careless security practices. So yeah, you would expect there to be more emails for sure. So again, they're reiterating that they held back a lot of derogatory information on Secretary Clinton, which is true. The ICA misrepresented documents on Putin's intentions. Is that what that says? I think that's intentions. Let's see. I'm just going to skip the next page. A key Russian political assessment was incorrectly cited as supporting the ICA judgment that Putin aspired to help Trump win. The ICA falsely cited analysis of the U.S. elections by Russian experts on American politics as evidence of Putin's intentions. So this seems to relate to what we mentioned earlier. The pundits, Russian pundits, were putting out some thoughts and analysis that was not reflective or consistent or known to be the inner circle of Vladimir Putin. That's true. So I'm going to skim through this, see if there's anything else worth highlighting. Yeah, I'm going to skip this page. I mean, we've covered a lot of this before, at least at a high level. Analytic report. Russian analytic report actually undermines the broader ICA judgment that Putin aspired to help Trump win. So we're spending a lot of times on this data point. Again, yeah. So they're rephrasing and reiterating a lot of the points they already made. Putin held back material when Trump would have needed it most. So don't think there's anything else really there worth highlighting. The ICA included a 2-page summary of a series of anti-Trump political opposition research reports, which have collectively come to be known as the dossier in the media. This was produced on behalf of the DNC and the Clinton campaign by former British intelligence operative Christopher Steele. So this is strange. So earlier, if you're here near the start of the stream, when they're talking about a source and a subsource, it sounded a lot like Christopher Steele. And now they're mentioning Steele by name, which would seem to indicate that source and subsource are not Christopher Steele and Igor Danchenko, but we'll keep reading. The dossier's most significant claims that Russia launched cyber activities to leak political emails were little more than a regurgitation of stories previously published by multiple media outlets prior to creation of the dossier. That's true. Or these reports largely disparage Trump's character, alleged collusion between him and Russia, contradicting public claims by the DCIA, John Brennan, that the dossier was not in any way incorporated into the dossier. The dossier was referenced in the ICA main body text and further detailed in a 2-page ICA annex. In the CIA main body text, the key judgment, we assessed the influence campaign aspired to help Trump's chances of victory, was followed by 4 bullets of supporting evidence. The 4th bullet referred the reader to a detailed summary and analysis of the dossier. For additional reporting on Russian plans and intentions, please see Annex A. So it references the dossier. And the annex summarized the dossier, included some analysis that struggled to imply that some dossier findings may have been corroborated by intelligence. None of the dossier is true. Even though the FBI had provided the dossier information via memo, just going to skip that. By devoting nearly 2 pages of ICA text to summarizing the dossier in a high-profile assessment intended for the president and president-elect, the ICA misrepresented both the significance and credibility of the dossier reports. That's true. Even though the dossier information was unclassified, the dossier summary was only included in the highest classified version of the ICA that was briefed to President Obama and President-elect Trump, and was seen by various national security officials and senior political appointees. It was omitted from the top secret version of the ICA released for Congress and the unclassified public release version. Interesting. By relegating the dossier text to only the highest classified version of the ICA, the authors were better able to shield the assessment from scrutiny, since access to that ICA version was so limited. Interesting. So they're saying, the highest level had the dossier, and then they omitted that when it went to Congress. Basically, they didn't want Congress looking over the shoulder and performing their oversight functions. So, not good. CIA analysts and operations officers struggled to explain how the ICA, written for 2 presidents and other high-level officials, could have included dossier information without identifying and vetting primary sources and without explaining the political circumstances surrounding why the report was produced and funded. Absolutely true. It's getting into dossier, outlandish claims. 2 CIA officers argued with John Brennan that dossier should not be included at all. Okay, so that's important. They argued with John Brennan, and their argument was that dossier should not be included at all because it failed to meet basic tradecraft standards. Same officer said that the Director Brennan refused to remove it, and when confronted with the dossier's many flaws, responded, "Yes, but doesn't it ring true?" That's not good. That's not good at all. I'm sure there's people that are going to be digging into John Brennan's testimony about the dossier, because that doesn't seem consistent with what he's testified to. CIA veterans noted that they could not imagine any previous director allowing such information in a formal CIA product, much less one intended for 2 presidents, and then overriding the objections of experienced senior officers to do so. Yeah, I'm trying to remember this off the top of my head on the fly, but what I remember is Brennan testifying that the FBI wanted to include the dossier and that John Brennan said he did not want to include it. And now the CIA officials or this report is suggesting that it was actually Brennan that insisted that it remain in there. Every CIA analyst and operations officer who was asked about the dossier took pains to emphasize that it had nothing to do with the decision to include Annex A, could not vouch for it, and did not believe it should have been included, and some CIA officials blamed FBI officials for including it to the ICA. So that's kind of what I was just saying. From what I remember, I think John Brennan's included in that. In his testimony, I think they pointed the finger at the FBI as wanting to include it. And I think Brennan said he did not want to include it. So interesting. Every CIA analyst said, took pains to emphasize they had nothing to do with the decision to include it. And you can understand why. Echoing comments by CIA officers discussing the 3 substandard CIA reports, the FBI senior analyst said that they were told by FBI leadership that all material, regardless of traditional sourcing standards, was to be made available in drafting the ICA. Well, that's not what happened, though, right? Our instructions were that anything we had was to be used. We were to push this. Interesting. We were to push this, and they underline that. So I wonder if we get a little bit more color on that. Senior analysts also addressed poor sourcing, noting that we were trying to determine who the steel subsources were. The question is, who are these people? Are they credible? We need to qualify the path of how this got to steel. I'm not comfortable that we don't know how this got to steel. The analyst did not say that any FBI personnel objected to the inclusion of the dossier into the ICA, as was clearly the case at the CIA. The analyst's words were carefully chosen, however. See, that's one thing I don't like about this report. They're giving us some subjectivity within the body of this. They're describing in subjective terms things that they should probably just leave out. They're saying the analyst's words were carefully chosen, however, highlighting strong concerns over unverifiable sourcing and dossier reports in their chain of acquisition. Yeah, I mean, you sit down with an investigator, you're probably going to choose your words carefully. I don't know. I would just omit that, unless we can hear from that analyst directly. Let's see what else. Yeah, then it's just going to get into the back and forth. It sounds like the FBI Assistant Director of the Counterintelligence Division, one of his senior officers, acting on behalf of their director, pushed to have the dossier woven in to the main text of the ICA, according to CIA and FBI analysts. That is bad. That is bad. Ultimately, the decision of how to handle the dossier was jointly made by the directors of the CIA and FBI, who overruled the objections from CIA officers and agreed to reference it with other ICA text bullets describing Putin's intentions, while placing the details of the dossier in the ICA Appendix A, according to CIA officials. The decision by the two directors was confirmed by FBI senior analysts who said it was debated for several days. Upper levels at CIA and FBI decided to put it in. And by a memo, for the record, written by director of the FBI, in which he told White House officials, I thought it was very important to be included. Then it's going to get into the dossier, and I might skip over this section. If you're unfamiliar with what they knew about the dossier at the time, it was evident early on. This was garbage. I'm going to skim it. There's a lot of coverage about the Christopher Steele work and dossier, and a lot of red flags. Let's see. Mr. Steele raised more red flags ignored by the ICA when he delivered the dossier reports to the FBI using a circuitous route that bypassed U.S. and U.K. intelligence authorities in London and appeared designed to get the material into official FBI channels while minimizing prospects for scrutiny of his suspect's source network. And they say he could have passed reports in London via British Secret Intelligence Service. Yep. Yeah, he had other options. That's kind of what I was referencing earlier. I mean, and that's the potential. I mean, CIA station. I mean, still, and that's one of the questions we still have. And it sounds more and more like there's some other source and subsource. Apparently, that was not Christopher Steele that was referenced earlier. But I think it's still a valid open question because, if Steele is really trying to impact the election, as he clearly was, he could have passed materials to the CIA as well, seemingly. Persuaded the agent who's based in Rome to fly to London to retrieve the documents. July 2016. That's true. Let's see. They're just going through the facts. And hopefully everybody knows this. Certainly go through and read it. But Steele dossier stuff, it's pretty much all out there. I don't see anything here that would be new. When the dossier summary was sent to CIA headquarters by the FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence, It was described as coming from a confidential human source, and paragraphs were highly classified, as if it were legitimate intelligence. Yeah. Same FBI agent also testified that Steele had been touting his relationship with the FBI when he tried to persuade media outlets to publish his dossier. There's more here. I mean, yeah, it's all important information, but I think all of this is out there. I'm just going to skim it, see if there's anything worth highlighting. Yeah, Steele dossier is trash. That's all that says. Got another slide here too. The ICA misleadingly claimed that the source was not compensated for the dossier information by the FBI. Yeah, that is absolutely false. They paid Christopher Steele. They offered Christopher Steele $1 million if he could verify the dossier or offer proof. So that is false. It's not clear why the ICA authors decided to cover up these payments. It's not a good look. It's not looking good. Not looking good at all. To the extent that they introduced evidence or misworded or reworded source reporting or relied on fragments and then withheld information, omitted information, including or just omit it, right? I mean, the ICA misleadingly claims that the source was not compensated. You wonder why they would go that far, because if it's in there, you think it's verified, right? I mean, that's interesting. I mean, that is intent to mislead. Otherwise, you would just omit it, right? If you didn't want to talk about it, you just omit it. But to claim something that is 180 degrees opposite, that's intent right there. So that's important. The ICA falsely claimed that Steele's reporting appears to have been acquired by multiple Western press organizations starting in October, when the FBI knew, because Steele had told them, they delivered the dossier to the media well before that. Yeah, and there was an Isikoff article that was particularly important months before that, and there were other reports too that they could clearly tell were Steele. So. Yeah, that's weird. Appears to have been acquired by media outlets in October. I wonder, I'm trying to make sense of why they would put that in there. Yeah, 23 September. That's the Yahoo Isikoff article. It was not accidentally acquired. Steele definitely went to them. Fusion GPS made a lot of connections as well. See if there's anything else worth highlighting. Throat's getting sore. Yeah. So now we're going to talk about the defensive briefing or lack thereof. ICA analysis of dossier did not take the form of defensive counterintelligence briefing. Dossier needed to be included to warn the president that it was out there. That is not true. So the credibility of the FBI director's claim that dossier needed to be included in the ICA to warn the president it was out there is destroyed by the fact that the most essential evidence affecting credibility of the dossier was intentionally omitted by the FBI and CIA. A true defensive briefing, ostensibly to warn Trump of Russian threats to himself or his staff, would not have omitted so much key information, nor would have excluded information on Trump associates like Carter Page. It also would have been inappropriate to share defensive briefing data in a document disseminated to CIA analysts and 250 other U.S. government officials. by leaving out so much critical information as to the dossier's origins, purpose, sponsors, and source bias, all of which would undermine credibility, the ICA falsely encouraged senior policymakers to draw alarmist conclusions that were not warranted by the evidence. Yeah, that is true, and I'm shocked that they're saying that. I think we've heard this from Comey that it needed to be in there to warn Trump, but the way they put it here is pretty stark. I mean, that is ridiculous. You know, if you want Trump to be aware of it, you just walk into his office and tell him this is an intelligence product. It's not just warning Trump. So let's see what else is out there. Yeah, a lot of this is out there. I don't want to spend time on dossier stuff. Okay, this is a good one. The ICA identifies some information from dossier reports, information so broad that could have been acquired from any number of media or academic writings on Putin's Russia, which the ICA claims were consistent with intelligence reporting. Under the ICA judgment that some of the FBI sources reporting is consistent with ICA analysis is the following bullet. The FBI source quoted three subsources who reported that Moscow's aim in its campaign was to upend international liberal order, cause tensions with European allies, shift U.S. policy on key Russian interests, and undermine U.S. politics. The ICA bullet text goes on to say this information is consistent with what reporting from a Western government service and signals intelligence indicated were key Russian goals. Such broad-ranging information could be consistent with all sources of reporting, classified or unclassified, and thus does not, as the ICA implies, constitute evidence of dossier's veracity. Yeah. I kind of dipped into this the other day. I did a comparison between the Steele dossier and the ICA, and I found there was some overlap there, and I think that's kind of what they're hinting at. You know, because Steele put so much trash in there, but worded it so vaguely and cryptically, I found, in my opinion, that the ICA adopted some of that into the language that was included. Let's see. Both human source reports cited by the ICA as corroborating the Steele dossier came from the blank, D blank. Both were given the lowest confidence rating by blank of limited confidence from an untested source with unvalidated secondhand access to a senior government official. And that is even not true. And I don't know if they knew this when they wrote the report, but it's not even secondhand access. The subsources to the Steele dossier are light years away from senior government officials of Russia. Like they're just regular people. They're childhood friends of Igor Danchenko. Their day jobs, range from like running a finance blog or a journalist or some various things. Like it's a weird concoction of people, and they truly have no access to intelligence. So there's, secondhand access is stretching it. It's imaginary. Let's see. ICA citations of limited confidence reports alleged to corroborate the dossier. Blank service comment. This report makes various assertions about Putin's objectives and priorities. It is not clear, though, whether these views are based on general understanding. Some of this commentary appears to be open source. Yeah. Yeah. They're digging into the dossier some more. Broad brush nature, which is true, which is kind of what I was just saying. I mean, Steele wrote in a very vague sense. I don't need to highlight that. Let's see what else. Let's see. Director wrote, told chief staff of the White House for Trump. Analysts from all three agencies agreed it was relevant, and portions of the material were corroborated. And I thought it was very important to be included, which is false. Absolutely false. None of it was corroborated. I mean, to the extent, again, when you write something vague, you can't vague enough. You can say it's corroborated, but it's kind of ridiculous at that point. I mean, the core elements that had any value were completely fabricated. But to the extent you say something vague, like they highlight on the left side, Russia saw NATO expansionism as a part of a trend of Western hostility towards Russia. Yeah, that's vague. Like it's super broad based, right? And to the extent you could say something like that is corroborative of anything else, yeah, true. I mean, that's the point they're making, right? It's ridiculous to say that's important, or to make that point, I guess. I can drink more water. All right, let's see what else we got. They're basically saying Comey was lying about the dossier. He went to the White House, he briefed on it, told a bunch of lies. They're breaking down those lies, which are pretty obvious. His credibility was in doubt by February 2016, but Comey did not mention the multitude of red flags by the dossier. See, on this tab, they're talking about a briefing in February 2017 when Comey visited the White House. And on this side, they say his credibility as a source was very much in doubt by February 2016. I think that's supposed to be February 2017, which is certainly true. By February 2017, Igor Danchenko had been interviewed in January, and he said this is all rumors and bar talk. So, yeah, they had overwhelming information, and they had offered Steele $1 million around the election, and he hadn't done anything by February. So Steele was desperate that Trump not become president. It's true. Yeah, and then they highlight Igor Danchenko. They met with principal source. They learned he had no relevant access to Putin or the Russian government, and the information was fabricated or hearsay upon hearsay, and that Steele had greatly exaggerated the credibility of the material and sources. Yeah, absolutely true. Let's see. Gonna skip that. Alternative hypotheses. Finding number 7. ICA failed to consider significant alternative hypotheses suggested by intelligence reporting. Digging back into his preference. See if there's anything new here. A lot of this I feel like we just talked about. Yeah, I mean, it's open. I mean, some intelligence indicated he actually preferred Hillary Clinton. We heard about that a couple of years ago, I think. Yeah, had additional compromising materials on Clinton that he could have released and didn't. Talk about that earlier. So, I mean, it's good information, but they seem to be re-summarizing a lot of this. Putin had reasons to want Clinton elected, is supported not only by his behavior, but also the timing and content of operational orders. That's good information. Let's see here. timing and targets of FSB and SVR covert media orders did not make sense if President Putin's intent was to ensure the election of candidate Trump. That makes sense. Let's see if there's any more detail to that. Yeah. Just going to try to hit the high points here. Had Putin preferred Trump to win, we would have expected more intelligence collection that would have mentioned Trump in campaign orders from Putin. Available intelligence showed no Putin orders directing or suggesting operations intended to elect Trump. No observed Russian operations that could be explained in the context of electing Trump. No evidence of attempts to covertly transfer money to the Trump campaign. No discussions or activities among subordinate authorities or technical operators suggesting that they were attempting to help Trump. No indications of orders to not engage in activities that would damage Trump. Yeah, and they raised the point earlier. I mean, Colin Powell, they released the emails from Colin Powell that were highly critical of Donald Trump. And you could say the same thing. I mean, if you believe that Fancy Bear Russians released the emails through WikiLeaks and were behind the Goose for 2.0 persona, the first document they released was a dossier on Donald Trump compiled at the DNC. It was a bunch of opposition research, and that's an odd choice. I mean, you could say they're trying to get it out there before you get closer to the election, but it's a bit of an odd choice because that first document is going to get the most fanfare out of anything you release. Moreover, all the legal operations could be attributed to Putin's objectives to undermine U.S. democracy. Interesting. Let's see if there's anything else. Nothing strikes me there. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing. I mean, there's nothing really new here. We kind of just went over a lot of this. You know, they could have done a lot more if they actually wanted to interfere. I mean, that's the broad point here. Yeah, so after the election, after Trump won, the Russians supposedly employed fake Facebook accounts to organize protest rallies to protest the election. Russians were behind Trump is not my president rally. So they're making the point, right, that they were just trying to undermine the election, which is important to know. Let's see. Anything else? Talking about the timing of the ICA, it was certainly rushed. They're making that point. A longer process could have allowed greater analyses and critical analysis of the various lessons there. Let me see. Let's see, 41. Getting towards the end here, so we'll see if there's anything worth highlighting. Seem to be talking about the back end of it now. They're talking about scheduling, the allegation that Putin preferred Trump was only published in one close hold President Daley's brief on August 2nd. In August and September, Brennan also gave oral briefings conducted separately to 8 senior congressional leaders using sensitive reporting, but with no written product. Complicated by the rush schedule. 5 CIA analysts were directed to write the ICA. So only 5 people wrote the ICA report, with one analyst just doing most of the drafting. Wouldn't you hate to be that guy? You have to write an ICA blaming Russia for everything, and then you have like Brennan looking over your shoulder, telling you which pieces to look at or to include. Let's see what else. Only 3 of the analysts had been cleared into the compartmented materials in the 4 months since the fusion cell was established. 5 authors would later express their astonishment to the committee that management made no significant changes to their draft. Something unheard of for a high-profile paper. Senior managers said they didn't even see the draft ICA until days before it was published. When they voiced their objections, it was in the context of fast approaching deadline, and there's additional pressure. Yeah. Recommendations. Okay. Just gonna have to hide bullet points here. ICA timeline. Interesting. There's nothing. The election eve fusion cell memo made no mention of Putin aspiring for a Trump victory. Memo's only mention of candidate Trump was to note that Putin did not care who wins the election. So it's amazing, right? Around the election, the fusion cell, the cell specifically set up to look at this stuff, said Putin doesn't care who wins the election. And between the election and the ICA, that turned into Putin preferred Donald Trump. So Brennan's got a lot to answer for in this, and why they relied on that fragment. There's probably the first hour of the stream was probably the more important part of this, because we got into that quite a bit, and yeah, they're relying on 3 substandard reports. They had a fragment. They had unverified subsource information. They didn't know who the subsource might have been talking to, what their access was. They didn't know if it was hearsay. They didn't know if it was a subsource's opinion. And that's the stuff they chose to rely on, even though it was contradicted by other reliable reporting. So, and that's it. That's the end of the report. So I'm going to take a minute here, see if anything is going on. Yeah. MB points out, I mean, the portion of the ICA that pointed at Trump was personally crafted by John Brennan, which is absolutely true. I mean, throughout this document, we were hearing about John Brennan overruling analysts and making it a point to rely on those substandard reports over the objections. Right? It's not like it was just a mistake, which would be bad enough. The CIA senior officials called it out, and they voiced their concerns, and John Brennan overruled them to include it and to rely on that evidence. And as I said earlier, all this, the entire narrative of Russia did this to help Donald Trump that we've heard so much of in the last 6 years, all traces back to basically these 6 words in this fragment that is open to interpretation, and a subsource with an anti-Trump bias who may have just been voicing their opinion. They had no idea. And all of that drove this narrative. So that's pretty insane. Reading through some other stuff. Fool Nelson was calling out the Clinton plan intelligence briefing. August 3rd, 2016, John Brennan personally met with President Obama. Joe Biden was there, other senior officials, including the Attorney General. And he briefed them on Clinton's alleged plan to tie Donald Trump to Russia. And I made that point earlier. So there's this reporting out there, and I think it got alluded to in here. I'm trying to find what slide that was. I should have wrote that down. Oh, I think it was way early. Basically, there's a bunch of emails, right? And I made the point. Some of the reporting that I was able to pick up. I mean, a lot of this, all of this T1, as was referenced yesterday, is Dutch intelligence. And the Dutch were watching a bunch of Russian intelligence groups, and they were able to obtain Russia's intelligence reports that we've heard about before. Clinton plan intelligence, the Renfrew memo, reports that we were told lack credibility. But as we learned yesterday, and as I picked up a piece of this earlier this year, apparently they also provided the emails that might support those Russian intelligence reports. And that's what we got a little bit of visibility to in this report and yesterday's report. And I made the point earlier, and I'll reiterate it. One of these emails is apparently from Jennifer Palmieri to Leonard Bernardo, stating that part of their plan was to have the FBI amplify the allegations. So there's a lot of emails apparently that are pretty inflammatory, and nobody's ever made an attempt to really verify them. See if there's any other tweets I want to call out. Yeah, I mean, I think that's pretty much it. So I think there might be additional reports out this week, and I might set up a stream again, whether it's later today or tomorrow perhaps, and cover those reports sort of in a similar way. We'll kind of read them together. Hopefully a little bit more fun to read, but do the best I can. At various points, if they become available, might grab Fool Nelson or some of the other sleuths and have them come in here and give us their take. But for now, I think I'm going to call it a stream, and we'll see what develops in the next couple of days, and see what else comes. So I appreciate everybody coming on, and hopefully you enjoyed it. Sorry my voice got dry there for a while, but I thought this was good. We could read it together and kind of go through it as best we could. And going to call it a stream here. Hope everybody has a good day. See you guys.